Dr. Mike Israetel, one of the smartest people in the world when it comes to bodybuilding, and one of the biggest YouTube channels, has put out the difference between training for size and strength. He put this out quite a while ago, but this video went crazy, and I'd love to give my 2 cents on the strength side and see if Mike hit the nail on the head or if there's a little bit left to be desired here. Now, in this video and in Mike's video, we're going to be covering, are they the same? Loading differences, volume differences, progression differences, frequency and undulation differences, exercise selection, getting the best of both, and does this matter to you? I'm going to give you Mike's take, and I'm going to give you any sort of my variation off of that. Now, first off, him and I agree on a lot. We actually had an extended conversation around this. If you want to check out that video of me talking with Mike Israetel, we'll pop that video up here. Now, are training for size and strength the same? No, Mike in this video really points out really well. You ask a lay person in the gym, what are you trying to do for goals? And they'll say, oh, I'm trying to get big and strong. And frankly, that's not the same thing for everyone. Stick around till the end and you'll find out who that actually is the same for, because there are a subset of people who can build both at the same time. But for most people, or a good chunk of people, that's just simply not the case. Now, first, let's talk about rep ranges. This is what Mike has to say. Strength increase in the 3 to 6 rep range and hypertrophy is increased in the 5 to 30 rep range. Now, he accurately points out that fatigue from 5 to 6 reps will be substantially higher than 10 to 20 at higher volumes. Now, I do want to point out, we're talking about neural fatigue, that type of fatigue that just makes you want to go home, go for a nap, do nothing, your brain is shot. That is what's going to be hammered with strength. Of course, when it comes to higher volumes, you're going to be working the muscles more, but you can have extremely sore biceps and go work your quads the next day, where if you have an extremely tired nervous system, you're not able to work anything the next day. Now, training strength for high volumes is just not a good idea. This would be the ultimate hack. If I could have one superpower, it would be training strength at high volume. The reason you can't do this is back to the nervous system. We have these two elements of the pendulum. On one element, we have your training volume and what you're demanding of yourself. And on the other, we have your recovery. I boil this down, and to be honest, oversimplify, but I boil it down to 3 things. It's sleep, it's your nutrition, and it's your life stress. Those 3 things need to be in check relative to the amounts you're demanding from your training. But those 3 things could never be good enough on top of all the hydrotherapy you want to do and massage and physio, et cetera, et cetera. You're always going to end up with a little bit of difficulty to keep up high volumes of strength training. You can get away with this for a short period of time if you're well away from your genetic potential, but I don't think this is a good idea for anyone. Strength is not just building a physical quality. Now, whether that has to do with nerve conduction velocity, whether that has to do with building a muscle, whether it has to do with creating motor units to be able to perform movements effectively, it's also a skill. And the skill of performing whatever movement you're looking to do. No one picks up an axle for the first time and knows how to clean and press it. No one knows how to pick up a log and press that away, which is why if you look at the Rogue Invitational from 2022 and you look at the max log event, what the CrossFitters did there is incredibly underappreciated. They are absurd athletes doing some incredible things. Now, when we talk about strength, Mike said 3 to 6 rep range. I would extend that out a little bit from 1 to 6 because 3 to 6 will sufficiently stimulate the physiological response, but it might not build skill the same. It's funny to think about, but being able to deadlift a set of 10 well versus your ability to deadlift a single well are not the same thing. The reason for that is that moving weight slowly is something that you have to harden your brain to and something you have to train yourself into. There's a funny 2-step process when someone's training to get strong. In the first stage, they're going to be thinking that they're close to their 1 rep max, but subjectively you can look, and if you have objective barbell data, you can look and say, that bar is still moving relatively well. I don't understand. And I've come to realize that beginners and intermediates, when they start into heavy strength training, believe that their stopping point is when the bar starts to slow down. When the bar is crawling, it's just barely dragging up your legs, you're just barely squatting it up. That's the time when you find out how strong you are. And it's actually a game of patience as much as anything. If you go into a heavy lift with pure aggression, that aggression is going to come, go, and you're probably not going to have the lift completed. These are these really explosive lifters that you'll see that don't necessarily have the absolute strength to carry them through. A good example of this would be Evan Singleton. Extraordinarily powerful, could be the most powerful person on the planet, And the other end of the spectrum is Thor. When you watch these two guys deadlift, 900 pounds, Evan probably moves it faster. But Thor just has this capacity for pure strength, and that's built in very, very low rep ranges. Now let's move on to volume differences. Mike says strength training is more fatiguing per set and requires less cumulative fatigue for best results. 100% agree. It is absolutely more fatiguing per set on the system as a whole. And in terms of cumulative fatigue, we have to be much more careful about it. And that's the vernacular I prefer to use, because it's not that you can't work into fatigue or work close to fatigue, because in, say, competition prep, when you're peaking for a show, totally normal to be working really, really hard. Say RPs 8, 9, 9.5, sometimes 10 leading into a show. Now, that being said, more often than not, we want to keep these at 6 and 7, because if you push hard too often, you're going to ruin your training for the rest of the week. You will have one good session if you push too hard, but you will not have session after session after session with productive results. Now, Mike also says here, lower volumes required for strength training than for hypertrophy training. We covered this up with loading differences in rep ranges, but of course, we're not talking about a rep range of 5, but doing 20 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 20. That's completely impractical. Now, just to clear up, what exactly is volume? Volume is a multiplication of sets times reps times load. Now, you're only able to do so much, and frankly, however that equation works out to be the highest, if you do it at a high intensity, that's a pretty good recipe for how you're going to build the most muscle, but it's not a good recipe for how you're going to build the most strength. So Mike is on the money here. Now, he says as well, there's an impasse to properly train for both of these. That's totally true. Volume should be low for strength training because you're doing very high loads for very low reps for very few sets, and should be relatively high for bodybuilding training because you're doing moderate loads for a high number of sets for a very high number of reps. That math, there's no getting away from it. Now let's move on to progression differences. Generally speaking, the biggest thing that surprised me when I've learned about bodybuilding training and spoke to my bodybuilding friends, Flex Lewis included, they don't really track their workouts. They don't really track the loads that they're using or the reps. They don't apply progressive overload as we do in the strength world. Their progressive overload is essentially training as hard as possible, training harder than last time. Shout out Greg Doucette. And that is enough for them. Even at the pro level, even at the top level, they go in and they know that it's leg day and they know that they want to do 3 sets of quads and 3 sets of hamstrings, and they will choose a quad exercise on the day and go and work that to failure. They don't know how much weight they did before. Now, this is an interesting spin for me and something that I can't fully wrap my head around when it comes to bodybuilders, because I personally would like to know if my numbers are moving forward. I think, though, this is where my personal bias comes into play, where they actually don't care in the least if their numbers are going up. And I've covered this in videos about how bodybuilders, for their muscle mass, are actually, per kilo, relatively weaker than a lot of, say, trained strength athletes or even trained people at the gym, because they focus so much on simulating muscles that they don't really do the movement. We actually see this go very, very bad when someone well-versed in bodybuilding switches over and tries a powerlifting movement, ruptures a bicep, ruptures a pec, whatever it may be. It often ends in injury. There's multiple reasons for this. One is that their joint size promotes them aesthetically looking good, which doesn't create a nice, robust joint. But the other side to this is strength athletes have these big, robust joints that are naturally going to look relatively unimpressive. And that's why I'm 320 pounds and I don't look like I'm incredibly muscle bound. But that resists a lot of force. The way that I think about bodybuilding and building muscle in the world of strength is that building muscle creates the engine, and training the skill for strength gives you the gas. Now, if you build this incredible engine and you've never put gas in the car, and all of a sudden you put gas in and expect it to go, but you haven't reinforced the wheels or the chassis or all of the other parts to make the car go, something is naturally going to fall apart. And that's what happens when bodybuilders try to dip their toe into the strength world more often than not, unless you are Stan Efforting, in which case you are just not normal. Shout out to Stan. So with progression differences, Mike says increasing volume will not make you stronger. but it will increase your work capacity. Now, I do want to touch on this because strength athletes often go too far down the rabbit hole of just get strong, get strong, get strong, get strong. And over time, those high loads and low work volumes tend to drop your work capacity down. So when you're at the point where you're going to pull a max deadlift, let's say you're hoping for 700 pounds, well, you've got to load on 14 plates onto the bar. And a lot of strength athletes, even in the process of building up those weights, they don't successfully lift that weight because they're tired, because their work capacity is so low. So during times of year, not when you're trying to be your strongest, but during times of year, as a strength athlete, you have to focus on your work capacity and build your work capacity up to the point where you can easily tolerate moderate work volumes. It's not hard to know that if your work capacity goes up, your ability to do more sets at a high intensity will go up. You can then increase your volume to a marginal degree. More volume at heavier loads is naturally going to mean you get stronger, not just physiologically, but also you have more capacity and space to build this skill. Next, Mike says, choose to increase volume if size is your goal and increase load if strength is your goal. 100%. This is absolutely right on the money. Your goal for a bodybuilder should be higher intensities, close to failure. I was a terrible bodybuilder, but that's what the literature says. And your goal as a strength athlete should be to lift more weight. This should not be seen as revolutionary information, but the way Mike communicates it definitely helps it hit home. Now, next up is frequency and undulation differences. He says that hypertrophy requires recovery of muscles. Undulating rep ranges can be successful, and he promotes even undulating rep ranges within the week. He also says you can't do the same frequency of hard training for strength and size in the same week. I really like this point, and I think it's an underappreciated point. When I think about communicating to the body with your training to cause a physiological adaptation, it's the most stubborn and uncomfortable experience to try to convince your body to do something that it doesn't want to do. And frankly, your body just wants to stay completely at homeostasis. It does not want to build muscle. It does not want to build strength. It just wants to protect itself. That's its natural urge. And to fight that urge to the point where you are actually causing change is so much more difficult than a lot of people would anticipate. And when I say difficult, don't confuse that with complicated. It is not complicated. It's just hard. Now, I do want to talk about the factors that affect recovery because, yes, strength training is going to be a relatively lower volume, but it still operates under the principle that you want to do as much training as you can while recovering well. And recovering well is a bit of a vague gray term, but continuing to progress, that you don't feel fatigued during the day or irritable, your body weight isn't changing considerably without you attempting to change it, and you're continuing to make progress. Really, that's what recovery should be considered in this context. But three main factors that influence recovery are going to be your training age, your chronological age, and your absolute strength. Naturally, if you're older, you've been training for a long time, and your absolute strength is really high, those three things are going to mean you're going to need substantially less volume. It always shocks people when I say I should actually be training less than someone just getting into strongman, because for the loads that I'm moving, I don't have a whole new nervous system. I don't have a whole new, I have new body armor, but I don't have a whole new components to my body. Meaning that my body, when I started, has to sustain and tolerate what I'm demanding of it now. Last up, we're talking about exercise selection. And he says for strength, you're focusing on building a movement. You're focusing on that movement and small variations of that movement. 100%. You're looking to build your squat. We're going squat. We're going front squat. We're going pause squat. We're going tempo squat. I would actually argue that if you're purely trying to build a squat, going to something like a leg press is probably too general for a peaking phase if that's your primary accessory. If you go squat to leg press, your legs may get stronger for leg pressing, but will you be able to coordinate that movement with your spinal erectors, with your upper back, with your calves to now move a free heavy barbell in a squat pattern? That's probably not as effective as other accessories that you can be doing. Muscle gives you the potential to exploit a skill, but strength training is a skill. Training to get strong is building a skill, the skill of being able to move heavy weight. What would surprise a lot of people is when I lift, say, a maximal squat, I'm thinking about balance more than I'm thinking about anything else. I'm not thinking about explosion. I'm not thinking about tightness. I'm thinking about the pressure in my feet, and I know if the pressure in my feet messes up, if I go too much on my toes or on my heels, that's going to be a problem. This is even true when I squat to full depth. He also says strength will not respond to single joints and machine movements. I agree to an extent. It definitely does depend on the machine, but regardless, isolation working machine should be a distant accessory. But I do think it's valuable. From a work capacity perspective, and being able to retain a reasonable level of work capacity without burning the nervous system, including some type of bodybuilding, some type of lighter movements, just to be able to be moving around, working harder than just going for a walk, and being in the gym, having your heart rate out for more extended periods of time. All of those secondary benefits are going to be massive if it comes to a strength athlete trying to get the best from themselves. Now, hypertrophy exercises spare the nervous system, which reduce the strength benefit while killing your muscles. He gives lunges as an example, which is a perfect example. Right now, I could probably do a set of 10 lunges with somewhere around 275 pounds on my back. But I can squat a set of 10 at the moment with probably somewhere between 700 and 725 pounds on my back. Meaning that it is well more than double, closer to triple the load when I'm using both my legs as when I'm using one. When you're using one, it could build a level of strength in your legs, but it's not necessarily going to translate over to the squat because it's just too far apart in terms of load. On the flip side, strength exercises, they of course help you build strength in that movement, but they're not so good for building muscle. Let's imagine you're doing a deadlift. You start to get tired after rep 1, 2, and 3 in the deadlift, so your hips start to rise. When your hips rise, you're relying more on, say, posterior chain, maybe your hamstrings, maybe your glutes, maybe your low back. We don't know unless we have intramuscular EMG. But what we do know is that shifting technique is going to take load from one muscle onto another. And you're going to be shifting your technique so that you're unloading the tired muscle and loading a fresh muscle. And you will undulate this a little bit just to get as much done as possible for that load, for that reps, for whatever you're trying to accomplish with that strength training set. Unloading and loading muscles and shifting your technique during a movement is not going to be useful. It's not going to be useful if you're trying to build muscle. It does help you with strategies to move heavy load, totally okay, but it's going to be at the expense of aesthetic results. Now let's get to the most important part of this. I did say there's a subset of people who can train for both at the same time. Pop in the comments who you think that might be. It's one distinct group who can train for strength and hypertrophy at the same time. And frankly, they can get strong with sets of 15 and they can get big or more muscular, I should say, in sets of 5 or even 3 or even 1. This group of people is beginners. Beginners, even up to early intermediates. If you're well far away from your genetic potential when it comes to strength and when it comes to building muscle, well, any sort of stimulus is going to be good for you. Now, this is something that I preach so much. If you're someone who hasn't really dove deep into any sort of physical realm, whether it's strength, endurance, muscle building, whatever it is, you get the benefit of the law of diminishing returns, meaning that you do a little bit and you're going to get a huge return at first. And this is something that should really excite you if you haven't been in the gym already. And if you get to the gym, it is a different community than you would expect. And that's why I started the Lift Heavy Be Kind clothing line. The link is in the description and in the pinned comments. A portion of profits always going back to good causes, to charities. And that is my little thank you to you for watching this video and for supporting me and for supporting the channel. If you don't have the money to go ahead and buy any merch, that's totally fine. Go ahead, click that subscribe button and leave a comment if you can. As per usual, Lift Heavy Be Kind. Let me know what you got from this video. Hopefully this helps guide your training, gives you a little bit of clarity to make the most when you go to the gym the next time. As per usual, Lift Heavy Be Kind, and we'll catch you tomorrow.